Now I'm muting everyone. That means that the speaker will be muted. Everyone will be muted. So you'll have to unmute when you begin to speak.
Okay, I have unmuted. Well, hello everybody, and welcome to the third Wednesday Vesper service of the Unitarian Universalist Multiracial Unity Action Council. I am Matthew Sher. I'll be your host for this session. Uh, our presenter this month is Dr. Neville Buch. He's a historian, but in a paradox of time, he's speaking to us from tomorrow because he actually is joining us from Brisbane, Australia, where it's already Thursday morning. So you get both ends of the time spectrum here. Um, he, professional historian, president of what's called Sophia, Sea of Faith in Australia, and director of the Brisbane Southside History Network. Now, I have to say, I met Neville at one of these several recurring uh, gatherings online that frequented by those of us who have an abiding interest in furthering our living tradition. And that's kind of related to the topic he'll be presenting to us tonight, and I'm sure you'll find him as engaging as I have. Uh, as we saw on the slide, this presentation is called Attitudes, Socio-Historical Change in Unitarian Universalism. And don't worry if that sounds very technical. I urge you to keep in mind that this man is a professional. And now I'm going to light our chalice. And so here we go. And of course, then I'll have to remember to say the words that I wrote here. Now let's just, it's hard to do two things at once here, folks. Those. And I will just tell you, I just made up these words, but we are the spiritual heirs of the Enlightenment. And we light this chalice. We light this chalice. There, that's better. To remind us that just as its light illuminates a room, so too may the light of knowledge and understanding illuminate our minds. And now we're going to turn it over to Neville for some opening words.
Yes, well, thank you very much, Matthew. And g'day. G'day, mates, from Australia. So today I'm going to reflect fairly deeply on attitudes in Unitarian Universalism. And as everyone knows, they're not always good. But in critical thinking, we can renew in ourselves a better Unitarian Universalist way of thinking. Each of us has a free mind, but we are not free in thinking if we do not understand the past in better ways of understanding histories and understand the way those histories are constructed. The past is the past, but histories are the stories we construct to understand the past. The better histories are those that explain changes of the past, to explain historical patterns. When we come to an end, when I conclude my thinking, we will look at Channing's 1830 election sermon and land on the conclusion of the philosophical correct idea of spiritual freedom. So, where do we go from here? Will we go to a prayer?
Yes. No, it's back to me. Sorry.
Okay, so I will stop sharing.
Yep, that's good. Thank you. Very good, very good. And now I have to start sharing. So one moment, please, folks. And do. So, our next service will be June 18th, always third Wednesday of the month, unless you're in Australia, in which case it's third Thursday morning. Jack Reich will be our wrangler, and it's going to be a surprise topic and surprise speaker, but it's always lively when Jack's in the saddle. So, and then you can always look at past services if you go to the website at uumuac.org, scroll down to get the link for third Wednesday services. And this is, again, we call it UMIAC because we got to pronounce it somehow, but we are the Unitarian Universalist Multiracial Unity Action Council, and this is our newly revised vision statement. We envision our congregations, associations, and communities as not being colorblind, but rather color appreciative, and as judging and treating people by the content of their character and not the color of their skin, their cultural heritage, or other identity, and as treasuring diversity in the context of Martin Luther King Jr.'s beloved community. And we call this multiracial, we call this vision multiracial unity. And this is where we end up. It's for the unity of the light and dark-skinned people of the world. And I know sometimes we also make note that UMIAC has now published 2 volumes for which I don't have slides prepared. I'll show them to you later. I can put, yeah, Richard.
I have them. I have them if you want.
All right, Richard, why don't you throw up those slides?
Yeah.
There we go. See, we're a team effort here, folks.
Just a minute. Just a minute.
Yeah. Richard's a big fan of silence, and I'm not. Go, Richard, speak.
This is the first book. This is a collection of articles from the first 7 years of our journal, which is called The Arrow. And much more recently, we've published a book by our founder, the Reverend Dr. Finley Campbell. This is a book on which he has been working for probably 20 years until his death in August of 2023. And a couple of our board members have edited it and put it into wonderful shape. These are both available on Amazon.
I assume you can find them by searching for UUMUAC, or is there another great way to search for them?
By the title.
Oh, but then okay, fine. Back to you, Neville, and then you'll let me know when you want the music.
Okay, so I'll go now to share my screen. So, first, either as different people will choose different terms, a prayer or a meditation, a very short one. But the thing is, it's probably a good process to calm one's spirit. I'm not always confident, even though I think that I expertly do these sort of processes many times. And you will see in terms of my presentation, even for Australian language, I don't pronounce words always correctly. So let's try and deal with our anxiety, in a moment of quiet as I read these words and reflect on how we can bring our spirits down to a good calm level. In silent thought, grant me the sincerity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Okay, I'll just... Yeah. So I'm going to story time. And so in a service, in a religious service, this would be called a children's story. But I suppose it reflects, I call it, it's a bit of a pun for me, a personal pun, in that, you know, in our youth, even though at the time of youth, we didn't like to be called children or thought of as children. But in some ways, the story reflects a process of maturing from childhood to young adulthood. And so the topic that we were looking at and that we're going to examine and discuss after the benediction is attitudes. And I first came to understand attitudes when I worked on my history honours thesis in 1987. The thesis was called Protestant Churches and Their Attitude to Public Issues from 1919 to 1939. And it was done in the Department of History at the University of Queensland, and I completed that work in November 1987. What I found was that attitudes are those elements of thinking that are a starting point of prejudgment. That is, when we're confronted with a new question and we are in the midst of prejudice and bias, and this question comes to us, and we have to deal with it with existing attitudes, as well as the adopted values framework that we would normally operate with. And it all settles into some sort of exclusion and inclusion in our thinking, and that creates the limits of our understanding. For Western democracy, Protestant attitudes had shaped everyone's thinking, including those who did not identify as Protestant. Okay, I assume that you're hearing me clearly and you're seeing the slides? Great. So a good way of sort of getting into looking at attitudes within Unitarian Universalism is to look at Clinton Lee Scott, A Parable for Pulpit Committees. I will say a little bit about Scott in a moment, but let me read to you this parable for pulpit committees. And so Scott said, "Now it came to pass that while the elder in Israel tarried in Babylon, a message came to him from a distant city, saying, 'Come thou and counsel with us. Help us to search out a priest, for the one that has served us has gone mad.' And the elder in Israel arose and journeyed to that distant city. And when the men of affairs were assembled, the elder spoke unto them and saying, 'What manner of man seeketh thee to be your new priest?' And they answered and said unto him, 'We seek a young man, yet the wisdom of grey hairs, one that speaketh his mind freely, yet give offence to no one, that draweth the multitudes to the temple on the Sabbath, but will not be displeased when we ourselves are absent. We desire one who has a gay mood, yet is of sombre mind, that seek out dark sayings and prophecies, yet speaketh not over our heads, that filleth the temple, build it up, yet defile not the sanctuary with a motley assortment of strangers. We seeketh one that puts the instruction of the young first, but requires not that we become teachers, that causes the treasury to prosper, yet asks not that we give more of our substance. Verily, we seek a prophet that will be unto us a leader, but will not seek to change us, for we like not to be disturbed. So, Clinton Lee Scott served a succession of Universalist churches from 1914 until 1971, when he retired from the active ministry at the impressive age of 84. He was the only Universalist to sign the original 1933 Humanist Manifesto. He wrote this parable that I just read, and that was reading comes actually from the Service of the Living Tradition at the General Assembly in 2011. Another reading is What is Enlightenment? Kant's famous essay. Kant. Everyone argues over this. Immanuel Kant. And he said, enlightenment is man's emergence from his self-imposed immaturity. Immaturity is the inability to use one's understanding without guidance from another. This immaturity is self-imposed when its cause lies, not in the lack of understanding, but in a lack of resolve and courage to use it without guidance from another. So there's a Latin term that he uses in this phrase, and I'm going to mutilate it, but Sarapita Audrey. But anyway, the English is have courage to use your own understanding. That is the motto of the Enlightenment. Can we then now go to a song and I will stop sharing? Matthew?
Yes, fine and dandy.
Okay, I shall.
Stop your share.
There it is, stop share. Right.
There we go. Okay, you'll hear the music start first, and then you'll see the video. Apparently, that's the only way I can get this done right. So do stand by. That's it.
Okay.
And back to you, Neville.
Yeah. There we are. So, sorry, I just got pick up the technology here. Yep. So, William Ellery Channing. We are all free.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yep. All free in our intention and free to rethink our intention for unity and universality. Channing stated, I call that mind free, which is not passively framed by outward circumstances and is not the creature of accidental impulse, which discovers everywhere the radiant signatures of the infinite spirit, and in them finds help to its own spiritual enlargement. End of quote. Now, I would argue that Channing is only half correct, and the social historical change since his time is that we have allowed ourselves to be, in fact, actively framed by outward circumstances. To some extent, it is an inescapable fact, but not so inescapable that we would think of it in terms of dogma that we practice. Each has a capacity to make their own thinking in self-awareness, and that is spiritual enlargement or spiritual enlightenment. So this is my work that I have, that you see on the screen, that I have developed in terms of cognition, histories, and sociology. And it is published on my website if you want to know more. We are in, and I'm just about to go and explain it. We are in different moments of time confronted, for each of us, a new question. But the thing is that every new question is not really a new question. In time, and space, we are being cast into the world of the past. In doing history, the psychical beginning is always prejudice. It is a statement of what is prejudged, that is the prejudgment. The only thing new in the world is the history you do not know, said President Harry Truman. The cycles of thinking, with the cycle of thinking, there is a movement from prejudice to knowledge and arising from our pre-existing attitudes. So there we are. So this is where I'm starting to explain the diagram. This is it. So in this process of trying to resolve a new question, we go to attitudes, which pre-exists there. And we also engage typologies of value, and typologies is just simply talking about types of values. Now, the model works as a system of thinking, and where until you sort of in this process of making connections between working concepts, the trouble is we're in this space, this non-engagement space, and I shall explain the concepts. Attitudes are states of what is forcefully conveyed in and of ideas. And they're forcefully conveyed being attitudes because they're grounded in natural and constructed dispositions, And the constructed dispositions is what has been shaped in the past. And when I use the word disposition, I'm only meaning taking a position in each of us making a claim or a statement, as opposed to when in our thinking or in our speech, we are just simply speculating. We say, well, I'm maybe this, that, maybe that, and so forth. We're not really haven't yet reached a position. Our attitudes can be forcefully directed to what is outside of our thinking or of the thinking itself. So the thinking itself is internal, and when we're directing it outside of our thinking, that's external. So this is this part of the diagram in terms of how those sort of layers or directions or perspectives really develop attitudes. In thinking, we are conditioned to think, thinking our values in different ways. So, attitudes, we go from prejudice, prejudgment to the attitudes, then to the values. We are attempting to connect one thought with another. That is, we're searching out the meaning of the words until they become concrete to each of us. And that happens by connecting with one of these thick concepts in the diagram. So, and then in terms of the overall framework, we refer to as a framework, is Carl Jung's system of thought, where he makes reference and creates a matrix between sensation, intuition, thinking, and feeling. And thinking here, because this is all thinking, but he was referring specifically to reason. And when he was referring to feeling, he was talking about passions. Okay, we can discuss this at the end, and hopefully that was clear enough. George Santara said, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. So that's the absence, referring to the absence of people's thinking of history or in history. But Malcolm X said, history is a people's memory, and without a memory, a man or a person or a woman, a human being, is demoted to a lower animal. So there's this very important thought in terms of humanism, and I am a lifelong member of Humanist Australia Limited. And then, but it is also, in a way, overlapping with that humanism. It is also spiritual. And John Dalberg Acton, the 19th century English Catholic historian and liberal politician and writer, said, history is not a burden on the memory, but an illumination of the soul. Okay, so my own construction into my writing and publishing of history is what I call spiral historiography. This is our feeling of spiraling in our thinking, and it is what each understands as the social historical change. The general change, of course, is never all good or bad. That is merely our judgment. We each have to explain and legitimize our judgment. If thoughts are diminished in our judgment, then the matters are spiraling downwards. But when something good happens, we judge it as we judge it. A momentum of an upward turn happens, and it happens in our thinking as better clarifying for ourselves what's happening, and we find things improve. Now, if you're not caring, that's this little area here. If you're not caring in the comprehension, you're not learning. And what you think you might know, you do not. This is not a criticism of a broad doctrine of neutrality, nor a broad doctrine of objectivity, where in fact care is integrated into the understanding of a neutral and objective stance. But in that case, if we say we're objective and we're neutral, in that case, it is also our subjective self in the judgment. So I'll just a little bit further to explain this, because this has to do with what I've been talking about is from a personal position. What's on the screen is, in a sense, an amalgamation of those personal positions to another layer, a collective layer, where that process of thinking leads us from questioning old dogma to creating to the different choices, to the choice of creating an alternative orthodoxy, or creating a sort of a double layer new orthodoxy where in the same sense, there are elements or perspectives of the old dogma that still carries through in time, but it's given far radical interpretation. And then in that sort of system, in those groupings, in those organizations, there's, those that shift more to a heterodoxy, more heretical than the sort of established positions. And as I said before, unfortunately, people can just simply become cynical and abandon any possible way of thinking that can, improve and clarify their way of life. Okay. Sorry, I'm the mouse. There we are. In Channing's 1830 election sermon, he recognized that his critics were very correct in what they said, but he argued that they still were very outdated in their thinking and language. So Channing stated, and I'm quoting here, "From what I have now said, the general tone of this discourse may be easily anticipated. I shall maintain that the highest interest of communities as well as individuals is a spiritual interest, that outward and earthly goods are of little worth, but as bearing on the mind and tending to its liberation, strength, and glory. And I'm fully aware that in taking that course, I lay myself open to objections. I shall be told that I show my ignorance of human nature in attempting to interest men by such refined views of society, that I am too speculative, that spiritual liberty is too unsubstantial and visionary to be proposed to statesmen as an end in legislation, that the dreams of the closet should not be obtrused on practical men. that gross and tangible realities can alone move the multitudes, and that to talk to politicians of the spiritual interests of society as of supreme importance is as idle as to try to stay with a breath the force of the whirlwind. So we'll have another time of music that might help us to reflect further on that spirituality.
Okay, I'm going to tee this up again. You may hear the music before you see it. Stand by. That's it.
Neville, you're muted.
Yes, sorry about that. It's multitasking, having to unmute and share screen, and then also go to the PowerPoint controls. My screen is shared, yes. All right. Here we are. So I just got to get the things to appear for me. I only got 2 screens and still not enough.
Do you need me to share, Neville?
No, it's fine. It's yes, I can see what's happened here. You wouldn't believe how many screen boxes are open. Okay, and I've gone too far back. Right. I believe that's, I'll just do a little check here, yeah. In a more concrete conclusion, and as histories, we have the Anglo-American major belief doubt systems. And this is your and mine sense of place, because I'm a member of a Commonwealth country, and your country originally was a Commonwealth country in terms of a number of the colonies, not all of them, but several of them were Commonwealths. And so that this Anglo-American major belief doubt systems extends back to that 17th century development in the the American colonies, well, the American English colonies at that time. And it's to do with, a system actually has to do with how we are shaped by prejudice, bias, attitudes, and values. The Anglo-American belief system has very much transformed our thinking in the present here. As such, there are 6 basic social political worldviews listed in this graph. So that's this. So, you know, there's a Tory establishment worldview. There is, in response to that, sort of British dissident, you know, Oliver Cromwell, extending back to Oliver Cromwell. And then, of course, in the establishment of American colonies, the English colonies in the 17th century, there is this mission and apologetics, which has developed into the American evangelical system of thinking. That's the sort of religious side, but also, you know, correlating with the religious thinking is the political thinking. And so in today's terms, it's really the establishment thinking, even though I suppose it's in some sense a contradiction of political thought, which keeps spiraling around. But since the 1960s, there's been an ultra-conservative development from William F. Buckley that developed what's normally called neoconservatism. And it's almost, it's antithetical. That's what I'm saying to the in terms of the contradiction in political thought to British establishment type conservatism. But there you have it. And it's sort of, you know, has been given attitudinal energy from what historians refer to as right populism. The right populism, of course, was responding to an earlier history of the Democrat tradition, which also in some ways has created contradictions and distortions in left populism. Whoops, sorry, there we go. But in amongst that too, both on the left and the right, has been an American evangelical establishment. This comes from my PhD thesis on American influence in Australia. And it's come through the European way of thinking, European reform tradition, more precisely Dutch. And that Dutch-American presence in American thinking has been very strong. And it's sort of, in some sense, both fallen victim of both right populism and left populism. And it also, in some sense, has emerged and reinforced and developed that American colonial tradition of mission and apologetics. This is very deep history, deep American history, and it has a presence in Australia as well, which is why I'm engaging with it. as an American-Australian relational historian. And we can discuss about this, but let me, in some sense, now sort of wrap this up as a service presentation and go to a benediction.
If I can just quickly intrude here, usually
All right, yeah, we need to break. Yeah.
usually between that and the benediction, we do present what passes for an offering, if I may do that right now.
Yes,
That'd be
yes, that's
wonderful.
all right.
Not a problem. This should be an easier share for me. And again, the Unitarian, Universalist, Multiracial, Unity Action Council at umiac.org. Membership is $30 a year. That's kind of your way of donating, and it is a 501c3 organization under our IRS code. We would appreciate your support and your donation, as well as your continued attendance at these services. And thank you very much. Back to you, Neville.
Okay, so, okay. So let's conclude here, but then go on to our discussion and questions or thoughts, reflections, objections, and so forth. But may the divinity of whatever other harmonious force which you have personally chosen guide you to understand history and practice comprehensive philosophy. So I'm going to now stop the sharing. And thank you for listening to me. I hope that wasn't too deep, but it was necessary to get to that level of thinking so that we can understand how sometimes each of us, everyone, is misguided by prejudice and bias, and how we have to question those and challenge those thoughts that we have, and to be able to move on, and improve our lives.
Matthew, do you want me to stop the recording?
I think this is the time to do it. I just do want to thank Neville for joining us and all of you for joining us.